now. A headline article published by Bloomberg has caused quite the stir. This article suggests that the Republic is on the brink of collapse. The article notes the role played by the private sector in the wake of a weakened state. This afternoon, we ask if indeed South Africa is on the brink of collapse. And to help us seek answers, or to get answers, is Martin Kingston, Chair of Business for South Africa. Martin, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. As we noted, the headline article has caused some stir and upsetting quite a number of South Africans. And the question remains, is the Republic on the brink of collapse, would you say?
Well, good afternoon, Dudu, to you and your viewers. Absolutely not. It is certainly not on the brink of collapse. It's in a state where it gives many of us pause for thought and concern, obviously. The challenges that we have around infrastructure, around crime and corruption, around unemployment, and around economic growth. But that doesn't in any way equate to being on the brink of collapse. It's an opportunity for us all as both citizens and indeed as businesses to put our shoulder to the wheel and to make sure that we can achieve our potential rather than actually catastrophizing about prospects that are not going to be a reality.
What then are indicators of a country on the brink of collapse?
Well, there is no doubt that we've seen a deterioration in the infrastructure, whether it be energy or transportation, whether it be water, whether it be social infrastructure such as hospitals, education, healthcare, more generally, social infrastructure, as I said. And that's a function of two issues primarily. One is a lack of maintenance, care and maintenance. The other, of course, is a lack of investment or responsible and appropriate investment. Some would say we've had inadequate governance and oversight, and I think that's also true in many of the cases that we're talking about. And we need to ensure that we remedy that as a matter of course, because if we have infrastructure that is failing, if we have higher or increasing levels of crime and corruption, that, of course, reduces confidence levels, increases uncertainty, and people, both individuals and indeed companies, are going to be reluctant to invest for the medium and the long term. And it is that investment that actually spurs economic growth. It actually increases activity, which now enables us to ensure that we've got the ability to offer sustainable employment to the many millions of South Africans who are not employed, particularly, I have to say, the youth, those that are coming out of school, and the unskilled. There's many opportunities for them, but only on the basis of a vibrant economy. And so I believe that it's absolutely essential that as a country we take stock of where we are, that we engage with all of our social partners, and most importantly, of course, with government, to ensure that we can focus our resources on remediating and addressing those specific challenges and shortfalls.
The ANC is attempting to do just that. It is currently hosting its local government workshop, and yesterday the Secretary General of the party noting that the public sector is weakened, and that by extension speaks to the governing party being the ANC. He also spoke about tenders, but talking about a need to insource rather than outsourcing the functions of government to business. What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, the Secretary General is absolutely correct that there's been a deterioration at local government level. That's where the problem is most apparent and acute. It's actually where the rubber hits the road for all of the citizenry of South Africa, and that needs to be addressed as a matter of course. That comes to governance and capacitation. By the same token, I don't believe that any of us within business are of the view that government needs to increase its footprint, that it needs to insource. It needs to enter into appropriate, transparent, arm's-length contractual relationships in terms of the services and the goods that it procures. It needs to be able to account for that in a very open and an appropriate and responsible manner. And we will all have seen the Auditor General's damning report, I have to say, of the public sector, and in particular of municipalities, most of which got a negative report from the Auditor General, much of it around procurement. We know that procurement, of course, is a hotbed of scope for corruption, for maladministration. So whether it is insourced or outsourced, the same principles have to apply, which is that we need to ensure that we are ensuring that taxpayers' money is spent in a responsible way, that we're getting value for money, that it is done in a manner that is defensible, with people who are competent and capable, as I said, whether they are in-source providers or outsourced providers. We think actually that small and medium-sized enterprises, micro-enterprises, both in the formal and informal sector, are the bedrock of economic activity in any country, in any society. There's much more that could be done in South Africa. To do that, we need to remove much of the red tape that exists. We need to put in place financing mechanisms that enable small and medium-sized enterprises to access capital on an appropriate and an affordable basis, assuming that their operations are viable. That's a much better way to grow the economy, and it's a much better way of providing services, goods and product to local authorities and municipalities than insourcing.
Mm-hmm. Martin, this article essentially, the Bloomberg article, speaks about the role of business, right? And it says that business is the only thing keeping South Africa from chaos, or rather the private sector is the only thing keeping South Africa from chaos. And they note situations, for instance, with private businesses that are filling potholes, to private businesses that are plugging the gap where education is concerned, and so it goes. How should we understand the relationship between government and the private sector? And what do you say to those who fear that the privatization, rather, of state-owned entities will lead to the most vulnerable in society having to pay more, whereas they still do not afford it? And so how do we capacitate the state?
Well, that's an absolutely correct concern that you've articulated, Dudu. So first of all, I have to say that there is a considerable scope for business and the private sector to partner and work alongside government at national through to municipal level. We demonstrated that very clearly during COVID-19, where we mobilized business for South Africa, business across the spectrum, formal, informal, large and small, domestic and international businesses, all came to the party. And I think that we demonstrated that we were able to work collaboratively and effectively with the state. We're doing the same thing now. We've announced that we're focusing on 3 areas in particular, not just those that you've mentioned, Dudu, but actually energy, dealing with load shedding and implementing the Energy Action Plan, addressing the issues around logistics and transportation, road, rail and port, and of course trying to ensure that we can reduce the levels of crime, corruption and maladministration. And I have to say, not just in the public sector, but the private sector as well, across society at large. We've mobilized significant amounts of expertise. We're working in defined work streams alongside the government work streams that have been formed. We've raised funds to be able to source expertise, both from individuals and companies, that can be donated to the presidency to enable them to implement the Energy Action Plan under the auspices of the National Energy Crisis Committee. And in all cases, we've done so knowing that we need to be able to demonstrate that we're doing it on an arm's length basis, that it is transparent, that it is accountable, and ultimately that we don't in any way undermine the integrity and the authority of the state. So to answer your question about privatization, we're not advocating privatization at all. What we're saying is that we think that there are skills and capabilities, experience and resources, as well as financial resources, that can be accessed by working collaboratively with the private sector, with the business community. The proof of the pudding, of course, is in the eating, but we're seeing progress already starting to be made in the context of the work that we're doing with the National Energy Crisis Committee on the Energy Action Plan. And I hope that we'll see it in other areas as well. And I think that if we're able to demonstrate progress in those areas, confidence levels will begin to rise. We'll see investment levels increasing. And the consequence of that, of course, will be an increase in economic activity and the creation of sustainable jobs to address the biggest challenge that we've got, of course, alongside poverty and inequality, which is the levels of unemployment, particularly amongst our youth.
Absolutely. Chairperson of Business for South Africa, Martin Kingston. Martin, a great pleasure. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.